Hello, everybody!
Turn this up in my headphones, Charles.
Woo! Let's turn it up. Turn it up, up, up. And then down. Hello, everybody! How you doing? Hello, hi. Welcome to the Friends Talking Fantasy Podcast. My name is Charles, and with me today, as always, is my lifelong friend and co-host, Dylan.
I'm ready to talk some fantasy with my friend Charles.
I'm ready to talk some fantasy with my friend as well, Dylan, but not just any fantasy today. This
very special episode.
Very special episode. The moment has come, guys. Episode 179. We are here. We are at the end of comeback week. And we've had so many wonderful guests. Phantology, Christian Cameron, Fiction Fans, Our Pod, MJ Kuhn. So many wonderful authors, podcasters, frequent collaborators, wonderful books that we've discussed. And what better way to... It feels like, Dylan, we're closing the chapter on a like a huge moment in
An
Friends
era.
Talking Fantasy podcast history. An era, exactly. Because,
yeah.
I mean, usher us in, Dylan. Usher us in. Do the honors.
Well, sure. I mean, we're here to talk about the one and only The Lies of Locke Lamora by Scott Lynch. A book that I've been trying to convince Charles to read for over a decade, including... I guess 178 episodes of recording a podcast about fantasy books. But we're here, and Charles, the world just seems a little bit brighter all of a sudden. Because you've read The Lies of Locke Lamora.
We've reached a new era. The world is just a little brighter today. And, I mean... Guys, you are listening to someone who has read The Lies of Locke Lamora. If you notice that maybe I might sound a little different, that's probably the reason why. Because I'm forever altered now. There was the past me that had never read it. And then all this time I've been reading it, and people have kept telling me to read it, and I had to play it up because we're keeping this episode a secret. We're recording it it's so secret. We announced it before we recorded it. We're right in the middle of comeback week right now.
Well, we announced that there was an episode and just put a question mark as to what the episode actually would be about. And I'll say it was guessed by one wonderful fan already. So
wow. I mean, anyone that's paying close attention, I feel like we need to take a quick moment before we get into the book. And I promise fans of Lies of Locke Lamora that want to hear a discussion, we're going to get there. But I feel like we need a little bit of history to celebrate this moment. This has come about from the first time we ever did Friends Pitching Fantasy, which is over a year ago now at this point.
It's like 2 years ago.
We did It's one of the first 10, 15 episodes.
We started this podcast in June of 2020.
So it's coming up on 2 years.
No, it's over. We're in July now, man.
Wow, we're in July.
Yeah. So we've been doing this podcast for over 2 years, and probably within the first month or two, we did our first Friends Pitching Fantasy where and for those who, we haven't done that in a long time, those who don't know what that is, we basically used to pitch 3 books to each other, and then each of us would pick one of the other person's 3 pitched books to be a next buddy read for us. And Charles, you picked The Name of the Wind by Patrick Rothfuss, so I'm not going to blame you too much for that one, but I did pitch it a second time, and you also didn't pick it then. So then we had a giant campaign by many fans, listeners, other content creators who are all telling you to read The Lies of Locke Lamora. And there was even a petition that got made.
There was a petition on change.org.
On change.org. Trying to make the world
I got
different.
emails, I got direct messages, multiple Twitter hashtags, a change.org petition. People have literally emailed me concerned, like, please just like read the book. And Dylan, you got everyone all spun up that I hadn't read it. And look, like it's been on my want to read list ever since it came out. I just, for the longest time before the show, I was all hung up on not starting a series until it was finished. And so that's why I avoided King Killer Chronicles and avoided Gentleman Bastards. And then the show got me into King Killer, and then I kind of put that idea behind me. And then it just took a while. And then after a while, it became part of my identity online, that I was the guy that has not read this book. So the fact that we're here today is huge. And, we've been on a hiatus for quite a while now, and we were coming up with a way to, how do we announce that we are ready to come back on a more regular schedule. And we came up with Comeback Week. We knew we had to close it out with reading this book and getting it behind us, man. And this is maybe the most anticipated book that we've done in a long time. So super happy to be jumping into it and talking about The Lies of Locke Lamora by Scott Lynch with my lifelong friend and co-host Dylan. Today is the day. Let's get into it.
Yeah. All right. Well, before we dive right into this, I do want to say that this is going to be a full, no-holds-barred discussion of The Lies of Locke Lamora. So if you haven't read yet, ooh, a little rusty, Charles, a little rusty. Gotta get back into this.
I know, it's been a while since it's been just the two of us.
Right, those R's versus those Y's is so difficult. If you haven't yet read The Lies of Locke Lamora by Scott Lynch, you might want to turn this down in your headphones and come back later when you have. And Charles, can we both highly recommend this book now to our wonderful listeners?
Dylan, we absolutely can recommend this book to our listeners. There's a lot to recommend in here. I mean, this book was talked up very highly, and I think once people found out more about my personal tastes in fantasy, then the recommendations came in even stronger, and all for good reasons. So I'm super excited to get into all of that, and I'm also super excited for an episode with just the two of us. As I kind of mentioned a little earlier, it's been a while since we announced our hiatus, that we've let ourselves be alone with each other on the air here. We've had a lot of guests, wonderful guests and co-hosts. We did the Chatham Voyage buddy read, which was awesome, and then we did Comeback Week. We had the Sarah El Arifi interview, which was so wonderful. So now it's just us in this beautiful book. I know. It's like the old days.
Yeah, it does feel kind of weird just being back the two of us, but it feels, in the same sense, it feels right. There's something that is different but correct about
a true
you and me.
Return to form, they say.
Yeah. Yeah, you and me here discussing a book like we used to long before we ever recorded any episodes about them. So, all right, Charles. I mean, where do we begin?
That is a great question. I'm almost inclined to just go from the beginning of this plot here and talk through it. And I guess the first thing that jumps to mind for me is like how quickly this book set itself apart from everything else we've read on the show. And this is just the beginning, where you have, I'm already forgetting his name. Is it the child taker? The child napper? What's his name? The very beginning guy who runs the school.
Yeah, is it a thief taker or the thief? That doesn't sound, thief maker.
Thief maker, maybe.
We're gonna mess this up already
start.
Early. I've read this multiple times, so I think it's thief maker. So I got it.
You got it. You know it.
Don't get on me. Yeah, you put me on the spot, which is fine. I've read it twice. I should know. Thief maker.
The thief maker with a young Locke Lamora was so much fun. I don't know. And he's trying to sell a young Locke off to Father Chains, and it's through this like selling process that you get to know the backstory of this almost legendary character of Locke Lamora. And I mean, there's like the one quote that stuck out to me was like, he steals too much. You know, that's the problem.
Right.
He steals too much. I can't keep him. He's too dangerous. And you're like, okay.
Leading up to that, he says, if he had a bloody gash across his throat and a physiker was trying to sew it up, Lamora would steal the needle and thread and die laughing. He's still just a kid at this time, so you get the sense that there's just something different about this kid. He's got some proclivity towards stealing that's just unnatural, but he's good at it. And what he's good at especially, we find out, is the teasing element of stealing for the thief maker, which is where he would put on sort of distraction acts and get people to believe like, he was some kid with a plague or something like that, so that he could, let's say, clear the way and steal all the money where people are just leaving it out gambling. So it's, we get that really witty, fun dialogue, and it sets the tone. In the beginning, it's Father Chains talking to the thief maker, and they're both just kind of old school haggling with each other.
Right.
It's a great start.
And Father Chains, what a great character, too. He, like, just the scathing yet witty dialogue that these guys have with each other complements just the job that they do as thieves so well, and it's some of the funniest dialogue I've read in a long time, and I really appreciated like something about just real actual cursing that I was ready for it. It hit I was vibing with it right away. We came off of reading like Way of Kings and all of that, where they have made up curse words for things, and Wheel of Time does the same thing.
Yeah.
With like, oh, light.
It's a Stormin good book, The Way of Kings, but you just won't get this kind of cursing from a Brandon Sanderson book.
No, or it's no blood and bloody ashes, no storm in this, no oh light that.
Yeah.
Like, it is straight up F-bombs, S-bombs, beautifully crafted.
All over the place.
Beautifully crafted, beautifully placed. And there's something to be said about that where... And it kind of reminds me of Patrick Rothfuss in a way. He doesn't really get vulgar too often, but it's this line of like, Scott Lynch clearly has the ability to write beautiful characters and dialogue, and he has those skills, and then he chooses to be vulgar on top of that. Because there's so many times you can just read dialogue and like, this is just vulgar to be vulgar, But he's like, purposefully choosing it, and the fact that he could make something more literature, capital L literature friendly, and then chooses to be dropping F-bombs and all this is so much fun. And Patrick Rothfuss does something similar where he takes those moments to be self-deprecating and tell jokes and err on humor more often than not, and sometimes, and it's just like not taking itself too seriously while also being really talented at the same time, that I'm just in love with.
Oh, yeah. And I'm sure we'll get into some of the most memorable quotes are used. I mean, it's almost a bummer that FTF is a family-friendly show because we can't deliver some of these lines with the same vulgarity and brilliance, really, as Scott Lynch does. But there's even, I think, about the... this like probably the most famous quote from this at this point is they do this big lead up with why you don't mess with bonds mages, because they're just so, it's like a full chapter basically of like bonds mages are so deadly, and if you like mess with them you could set the whole group against you, and just like you never ever do that. And then it goes to Locke, who's like tied up facing a bonds mage, and he's like, nice bird, a-hole. And it's like the first line. It's so disrespectful to everyone. He's such a smart ass, and he's like, I definitely named Locke back in one of our first episodes ever when we talked about just favorite characters in fantasy, period. And he's right up there for me.
Oh, yeah.
How'd he do for you, Charles? Did he crack any lists?
He's way up there, and we can get more into his character now if we want to. Just the one thing that holds me back from him being like an all-timer is the fact that he's just cannot stop stealing. He steals too much. He hasn't learned his lessons, and he got all of his friends and family killed because he couldn't stop.
It's true.
He had every teacher tell him he's crossing the line. He like doesn't see the line. He just is so attracted to the big con that he doesn't realize that he's crossed the line ages ago. And even at the end with the Bonds mage is a good example. It's like, I didn't kill him. I just cut off all his extremities and cut his tongue out. He's still alive. It's like, Locke, what are you doing? And then you compare that to when he fakes a plague and to steal coins off in the bar, and then they kill everyone in the bar and light it on fire. It's like, you cross a line at a certain point, and you're not even doing it for anything other than the love of the game, that you risk everything, and so many people die and this and that, and it's that part of it which I love. I think, Christian Cameron said a cool thing where it's like, it's fun to have characters that are blind to things sometimes. So Locke is blind to that, and it makes it fun. It's just so frustrating when you see it happen, and frustrating in a good way. Like, you want to be frustrated at a character when they're
For me, I think that's part of what I love about Locke, and I think he's a deeply flawed character where he's, he doesn't get the accusations of being a Mary Sue in the way that a character like Quoth does. I mean, obviously, we love Quoth, but he's a character that he's ridiculously clever, and there's show don't tell clever in this too, which I love. Like, you get to see him actually being really clever instead of us just hearing how clever he is. But this is a part of his character that is clearly from, like you said, he steals too much. It's from the moment where you even introduce the idea of Locke, and then over and over again. I mean, there's quotes like the one from, oh God, I can't remember who this is. I think this is Father Chains who says this toward the end of the book, where he's like, someday Locke Lamora.
Oh, that's Father Chains.
Someday you're going to F up so magnificently, so ambitiously, so overwhelmingly that the sky will light up and the moons will spin and the gods themselves will crap. I'm changing that bit a little bit. Comets with glee. And I just hope I'm still around to see it. And then Locke says, oh, please. It'll never happen. And it's great timing, too, with that quote, because it happens, like, right after it's, like, one of the last things in the book, after Locke's basically gotten everyone, like, killed and all this stuff.
He's
he's
towards
just
the end.
I don't know.
And that's a great
that's the
moment.
thing. We know it's not a thing where it's like Scott Lynch isn't aware. He's telling you over and over again, this is just part of this character. So,
and it's called The Lies of Locke Lamora, and the beginning is like 3 different instances in which his big scheme ended with like mass murder that he never considered, because he doesn't want people to die. Like, he very much is like, I only wanted that one kid to get in trouble. I didn't want anyone to get killed. Right. And it's like, well, by stealing that big of a coin and setting your ambitions too high, you set off a chain of events that got the whole class killed. This is one of those things about his character that is fascinating, and that plays into like having to pay off your what do they call it, like a debt or something. I'm gonna mess it up again, but where he has to pay for every person that was killed as the result of his actions. I forget the name of that, but because that comes up multiple times. But yeah, that's
death offering.
Death
it's a death
offering
that you make.
Yes, thank you. Yes, a death offering. Mm-hmm. But to bring it back to Locke's character, it's this idea of like, he has all the best intentions. He just wants to show off his thieving abilities. He just completely lacks any sense of like who he's dealing with and what's going to happen to him after he pulls it off, and it's costed him people he didn't know, strangers, and then his classmates, and then eventually his loved ones. So to watch that trajectory was both captivating and frustrating, but in all the best ways possible.
Yeah, I think that's one of the things that makes him so interesting. And it's like the difference between being clever and being wise, or the word that they use in the book is circumspect. Like Father Chains is like, Or actually, I think that's a thief maker who's like, yeah.
Oh, yeah. See, do you know what circumspect means? It's like,
yeah.
no.
Locke's, yeah, he did not embody it either. So, yeah, Locke is preposterously clever. He's very smart, but he just doesn't, he's rash. He doesn't think through his actions, and it's funny because there's this big thing in the book, which is, I don't have the quote in front of me, but it's like, there's no freedom like the freedom of being constantly underestimated.
Yeah, there's no freedom quite like the freedom of being constantly underestimated. And that's the quote.
Oh, I almost nailed that.
You were very, very close, yeah.
I missed one word.
One of my favorite lines in the whole book, by the way. It's such a great quote.
Oh, it's beautiful. And Locke Lamora, part of his... what makes him so perfect, the way they describe him, he's just like the most average looking person in every way. Just like could be any individual, where it's like, we get a lot of these protagonists that are described as like the best looking, you think of Rand from Wheel of Time.
Right.
They're described as like the best looking people.
Red hair, blue eyes.
Yeah, red hair. Yeah, exactly. And Locke, it's just like, no, he's just looks like any person possible and so average, and that's why he's perfect to be a thief, because he could just blend into the crowd. But anyway, the idea of the being constantly underestimated thing, in another sense, Locke maybe is constantly underestimated by other people, but he also constantly overestimates himself, and he constantly underestimates everyone else.
Yes.
In comparison to him. So he's kind of allowing other people a lot of freedom by nature of him underestimating them. So
well said.
I've always kind of thought that that quote works two ways.
And I agree completely. It's a huge flaw of Locke's, and it brings me back to like Brandon Sanderson's like YouTube videos of his like writing class about having dualities in characters, and what makes a good character is kind of their contradictions. And I think you hit it on the head right there. It's like he's someone who is super talented, and he's talented enough that he can live like just like he doesn't need to show off, but he's a show-offy guy. He can't stop himself, but he's doing it for an audience of nobody. He's trying so hard to be obscure and live in the shadows and hide his wealth and all of that to not attract unwanted attention. But then he goes and like, I'm going to con the Duke right now. And there's this huge heist. Or, I'm going to go and talk to Kappa Barsavi and do all these other crazy things. It's like, man, you could have left. Like, he had the option when he was faced by the Grey King and told to imitate him to Kappa Barsavi. He could have fled. And it probably wouldn't have gone well, honestly, given the Bonds Mage's existence. But it was an option. And... But anyway, it's a good duality that Locke has.
And he could have left before all of that, because everyone in the Gentleman Bastards, besides Locke himself, was pushing Locke to leave before he even got involved with the Grey King or the Bonds Mage, or the Falconer. Because right after one of the other Garistas got killed, of one of the other thieving crews, I remember especially Carlo and Galdo were telling him you got to get out of here. We just got to protect you because you could be next. And that is before the Grey King sets his eyes on Locke.
Right, that's true. And he has multiple opportunities. He's had means to do all kinds of things and just can't shake the con. And that's also, kind of compounded by he does have this almost kind of this heart to him. He loves his friends, and he loves his found family. And I don't think he ever realized how much he was risking them at one point, and then that just kind of fueled him to go even further after they died, to do all kinds of irreversible actions that are way worse. I think it's after they lose everyone that they go back into that interlude and drop the "someday you'll mess up so bad" line. And then I think that's when he kills the Bonds Mage and kills the Grey King. And it's like...
Well, he doesn't kill the Bonds Mage. He just chops off all of his fingers and takes his tongue. And then by the end, you have the Bonds Mage, the Falconer, you know, he can't speak or even really gesture that much, but he's like discovered. So they let him loose, and it is it is a moment where it's like, oh Locke, like like just because you didn't kill him doesn't mean that they're not going to be upset with what you did to this guy.
Exactly. And it's like you said, he's underestimating his enemies very often, I think, and this is one of those cases where it's kicking off a whole series, and it's an inciting incident to a potentially even bigger threat than they've faced already. So great character in Locke Lamora. Another character that I remember you bringing up way back in the day was Father Chains. And I gotta say,
in our mentor episode, right?
Yeah, our favorite
like
mentors.
We did an episode like best mentors. It's so long ago at this point.
Yeah. And one of yours was Father Chains, and I even think you dropped that line about how he would mess up and all that. I think you dropped that quote. I think because it sounded familiar when I read it, and I was like, oh, this is the quote. And he's fantastic. And I mean, this twist on the mentor where this book is like surprisingly compassionate for a book that's about thieves, and that's something that always surprised me. Like even the thief maker, who is like, I'm selling it to you because he's gonna die otherwise. Like there's some compassion to him, even though he's stealing orphans and training them to steal and kills people. Like he has this weird streak of compassion, and he's like, oh, he never lets them get sold into like sex slavery.
That's the compassion from him. Like, I think he was selling Locke just to, like, the way that a lot of characters, including Father Chains, frame his decision to sell Locke was just to like make a little bit of extra scratch out of the situation. Maybe there was some compassion, but Father Chains doesn't think of it that way. But Father Chains does say that the thief maker is actually too compassionate to sell them into slavery, which is interesting. Like everyone's got a code in this book, and including Locke for sure, who when he's given the option at the end of the book between going to go save it's like 600 nobles or getting his revenge that he wants so badly on the Grey King, Locke chooses to risk himself to save the nobles from being gentled. And he's even like, oh, that's no choice at all. And when he does it, he's like, I'm a priest. Which is so interesting to think of Locke as a priest, but he's a priest of the Nameless 13th. So he's got this weird moral code where he will steal anything from nobles, and he doesn't even want it. Like they just have all this money just stocked up in their house, basically, and some reason he just sees life as being pretty sacred in a way that you wouldn't expect from this like morally gray thieving crew leader.
Right, and I think some of that shines through just with his upbringing, because Father Chains is also kind of a compassionate guy. I mean, sometimes he teaches through tough love, but he had a lot of great lessons to impart, and he was insistent on, everyone getting educated and earning their place at the table. And then, like, one of my favorite scenes was when he was walking Locke, like when Locke was a kid, and he was walking him to a farm, and he's like, because at some point you got to learn how to be on your own, and it's like all those kind of moments where you're like, oh, that's actually, these are endearing moments that you get with Father Chains. And even when he's saying someday you're gonna screw up so bad that the gods are gonna like laugh with glee, I just hope I'm around to see it. It's actually like a sweet, tender moment, and it's one of the last moments you get of Father Chains, but before the book ends too. It's kind of like this sweet moment couched in cursing and vulgarity, and I hope I'm there to see you fail. It's a weird combination.
Father Chains loves them.
Yes.
I mean, straight up. Yes. And he tells them, look, you're my legacy. And he puts so much into them, and he takes risks by taking someone like Locke on is taking a huge risk. He was in a position where Kappa Barsavi was giving him some space and not looking too closely into what was going on, because apparently Father Chains was part of like coming up with Barsavi, so Barsavi gives him a break. But yeah, you have a kid who's already attracted the attention of lots of people by breaking the secret peace. This is for those who haven't read for a while. Secret peace being the agreement between the nobles and the quote-unquote right people of Kamor, meaning like the thieves under Kappa Barsavi who are not supposed to steal from the nobles, although that certainly doesn't stop Locke and the gentleman bastards. But yeah, there's a big risk he's taking on by training, especially Locke. And yeah, he's just willing to do it because he
sees the potential in them too, and he tries to bring that out in them as much as possible. He's like, those two, the twins, they're good. The sons of twins, like they're jack of all trades, master of none. Don't worry about them. You are gonna be my brain child here, and then Locke is gonna be my muscle. And they
you mean Jean's going to be the muscle?
Jean is going to be the
Locke
muscle.
is
right?
the
I don't
opposite.
know why I said Locke. So they're like, and he pits them against each other sometimes as a way to get them to learn, like genuinely learn their humility and stuff like that. And it's a surprising amount of love and endearment in this story that in an otherwise like book that could be like considered super gritty and grimdark and all that stuff, and certainly there is a lot of that, but first and foremost, this book is quite compassionate, which I wasn't expecting. I was expecting a lot more classic rogue elements of like, oh, well, that's what you get for trying to be nice in this world. And you don't really get that here.
Yeah. And we talked about this some with MJ Kuhn, who we just had on for us like weeks ago, but for our listeners yesterday.
Yeah, yesterday. So which she mentions me not reading this book, by the way.
Oh, yes.
One of those things you just have to hold on to. It was like, I'm reading it right now, if only you knew.
Yeah. Yeah, you had an international best-selling author on your case, and she's been plugged in on all the memes and stuff about it too, so we always appreciate that. And just talking about actually a lot of the rogue crews of the fantasy genre, at least recently, because there's older, so like I think it's like Farford and the Grey Mouser or something, which I haven't read, but is like one of the really like older school rogue books. But anyway, this has inspired a lot of the more modern rogue books. And, MJ said that her book Among Thieves was in large part inspired by this. And it kind of set the tone with this thieving crews that all actually love each other, like the actual honor among thieves aspect of it, where they love each other and look out for each other. And it's actually a subversion nowadays, like what MJ did with having everyone in the thieving crew down to pretty much betray everyone else in the thieving crew. So it's interesting how this set that tone. And I think Locke and the others all kind of go a next step by mostly wanting to not like kill people in general and wanting to do right by people. They have a little bit of the Robin Hood element to them, where they're steal from the rich and not give to anyone,
give to themselves.
Give to themselves, but they don't even buy anything with it, which is like
they can't arise suspicion. They have to like slowly like launder the money. Because if you just start spending thousands of crowns, it would be rather suspicious. But that's I can see how this kind of paved a different, like forged a new path for like roguelike gray fantasy, because it is those elements of humor, camaraderie. It takes honor amongst thieves, but it's like, it's not quite honor amongst thieves. It's like compassion amongst thieves, where it's like they just all kind of like love. We don't want to fight each other. We don't want to kill. Yeah, like we want to get along and live in peace and just steal because it's fun. which is a pretty wild scenario to be in. But I mean, to steal, you have to be like a good actor. You have to be good at math. You have to be strong. You have to be all these things. So it kind of gets to, flex all these gentlemanly qualities about them. Or like how to have like a fancy dinner and what fork to use and how to cook a meal and how to clean a meal and how to serve a meal. Like they're learning all of these things because it's just like how they live life. And stealing is just something like in this world of Camor is just kind of like a fact of life. It's like part of the structure of society. It's like, yeah, you can steal, just not from these people. And that's kind of how this economy works. It's a really interesting world.
Yeah, I mean, he's got to roll around with dons and stuff. So that's one of the first things we really see from adult Locke is that he's got this big heist that he's going to pull off. He's going to pretend to be a wine merchant named Lucas Fairright. And he's going to rob Don Solvara. And that's... it's great too. Like you very quickly get a feel for what's going on during that scene, like what the gentleman bastards are like, where he's having them choke him out. He's having one of the Sansa twins like choke him out, and the other one's choking out Jean. And they like figured everything out. They're just waiting outside the church for the Don to come out, and everything's so elaborately thought through. And then he has the ability to play up that role in a way that he never would have without this gentlemanly upbringing.
For
But
sure.
They never forget the bastardly upbringing either.
They never forget. And the cleverness compounds when he pretends to be like someone in the guard and outs himself as a ruse. It's just like another level. It's like, just keep giving him money. We're going to capture him. We're building up the case. Don't act like anything's different. And it's like pretty wild stuff.
Yeah, I mean, it's brilliant, but it's classic Locke because it's like overcomplicating it in a way where it's like, okay, yeah, this is really smart and I see why this would work. But the risk that they're taking by having to break in and they have to take out Conte, who's like this really like great fighter, and Locke takes a few kicks to a pretty sensitive area in that fight, and he's still gotta pretend to be a midnighter. So yeah, it's really smart, but it does have that love of the game feel to it, where he's like, oh my god,
it's very over the top, very grandiose. It's like,
wouldn't it be so
there's
cool
an easier way to do this. It reminds me of one of these scenes that to me kind of sucked the momentum out of the back quarter of the book, but it's still pretty good. But like, all the stuff with the Grey King happens, and then Locke's like, I need clothes. And you would normally, that could just be handled in the background. It's like, and then Locke got clothes and went on to do a thing. But no, it goes on to him.
Or Scott could have just not had the clothes get robbed.
Yeah.
Like this whole,
or you just beat someone up and steal their clothes. Like there's so many ways you could go.
Like
but
John could do that.
Instead, you have Locke like go to one person and then learn a thing to con a second person to then con a third person to then get the clothes. It was like 20 to 50 pages of clothes stealing, and you're like, what is going on? Isn't time of the essence right now? And we're like 3 cons deep into clothes stealing, but that's just how Locke operates, Yeah,
it's not the strongest part of the book. You texted me about that when you got there, and I hadn't read the Lies of Locke Lamora in years, so I was like, I don't know what he's talking about with all this clothes stuff. And then I got there, I was like, wow, this is actually really long. And
it's like one of the most interesting things in the book just happened.
Yeah, exactly. It's like in one of the most central parts of the book. Like he's about to go after the Grey King, and it's pretty long.
It's after
like
he gets stuffed in the barrel and before he goes to the dinner, the big dinner where everything goes down, and he has a run-in with the Grey King again at the dinner. And there's just this huge gap in what you could consider the rising action.
So it is a momentum killer. It's a momentum killer. What I thought when I was reading it, I was like, this would be a great short story about Locke Lamora. Like if Scott Lynch were to just drop a short story in an anthology or something, like, oh, like you can read about just a random con that Locke pulled off.
It is a good con.
It would be really entertaining.
Like, it was an entertaining con.
Right. But it just cuts into the, like you said, the rising action and the way it's not the strongest part of the book, even though it's also good in itself, just the timing and the pacing of it. But anyway, that's let's jump back to some of the better moments, and then we can see if we want to jump back a little earlier in the book, because something that sticks out to me early on, I love the way that Scott Lynch builds up Kappa Barsavi, where he tells that whole story about the carpet, where it's like, you remember this, Charles?
Yes.
Where, yeah. So Kappa Barsavi, the like Lord of the Underworld, basically in Kamor, he has this carpet that's like this really nice carpet, and he's in the process of eliminating all his enemies in the underworld and his like rise to true power. And he'll have people come over for like dinner or whatever he says. And if the carpet wasn't laid out, you knew he was just going to kill everyone, because it's like, oh, he didn't want to get his carpet all messed up. So then people learn about that. They send spies to figure out, like, oh, is the carpet down or is it up? And then finally what he does is he just leaves the carpet down. He invites, like, all his biggest enemies, and then he just slaughters them and gets the carpet completely messed up. And it's like another, like, show don't tell moment where it's like, oh, that's actually really smart that he did that. And it builds his character as this just ruthless, almost mastermind. And I think that's something that Scott Lynch does really well, is he can build up characters like that. And then it makes it even more impressive when the Grey King topples him, and you get this moment where Barsavi is like just like crying at the Grey King's feet, and then he gets him like eaten by a shark. It's like, oh crap. Like, this is like the big fish just ate the little fish, both literally and figuratively. Well, I guess not literally. Kappa Barsavi's not fish, but he did get eaten by a big fish.
Yes, he did. There was some poetic justice to that.
Right. And then it's like, oh wow, so this guy is even more dangerous than Kappa Barsavi, who's built up like such a foe in the beginning.
I agree, and it makes those moments at the end, like those plot points, those twists, that much more fascinating, because you also meet Kappa Barsavi, and Locke enters the room. He's been summoned, and he's just interrogating people and killing them, and it's very clear that everyone he's interrogating has no idea what he's talking about, and he's just killing them anyway and feeding them to the fish, and it's very violent. Yeah. And then he's like, I want you to court my daughter. And you're like, oh man, this guy is like in the thick of it now. Like, what is he going to do in this predicament? And then like a chapter or two later, it's like, oh, she's dead now. she's totally gone. And you're like, whoa, what a departure this has taken. And then like that's a great entrance for the Grey King as well, leading up to him actually like pulling one on Kappa Barsavi. It's that whole, all those twists and turns at the end caught me by surprise. Like, I was pretty impressed by them, actually.
Yeah, I'll say though, it is like the classic women in refrigerators, but I guess in this case it's like women in barrel filled with horse piss, like trope that and this was written a long time ago, before people were, or not a long time ago, but 2006, did we say?
Early 2000s, yeah. It was like, I think it was 2006.
Yeah. So
June
before
2006.
People were talking about this. And I'll say there are multiple strong female characters in this book, so it's not like it's something that is like horrible, I think. But that's not the strongest moment. But what it does do for the Grey King and how it serves his plot is impressive. So,
and what it does from a plot point too, it keeps you, the reader, guessing, because he literally put all this time into setting up this scenario of, Locke all of a sudden his notoriety, his star is rising. People are paying attention to him, and now he's got to court the daughter of Kappa Barsavi and potentially be like a counsel to the next Kappa, you know, and like they so much time spent in building that up with that whole conversation, just to pull the rug out from all of it. Be like, no, we're not doing that. You know, she's dead now. Which was,
and they even built Nazca's character from the moment where Locke was little and went to see Kappa Barsavi. So you really do think she's going to be this big character. So yeah, the twist is good. I don't want to get down on that. And there's also like, oh, by the way, I really enjoy how Kappa Barsavi's take on Locke is like, you're this like really cautious, like put together guy. Like, we need someone like that around my sons because they're a little too rash. And I forget the word he keeps using to describe Locke, but it's basically like circumspect. It's like, oh yeah, you're this really cautious guy, because Locke just has everyone completely fooled as to who he is. They think he's in this like lower level,
this humble thieving crew, like that picks pockets or something.
Right. Doesn't take too many risks, but like always shows up on time to pay their dues, which are just like a tiny fraction of what they're actually making. But Kappa Barsavi doesn't know that.
And he's like, I can tell you guys are honest because sometimes you give more, sometimes you give less. And it's like, well.
Right. They're just good at being dishonest.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. So, yeah, I mean, those are some wonderful moments and really great just setups, payoffs throughout the whole thing. The plotting, I have to say, is pretty excellent. I know a lot of people, when they talk about this book, talk about the use of interludes and the going back and forth in time. And it wasn't that long ago that I also was like, oh, the time jump thing. I was the first to criticize it. But Mark Lawrence kind of talked me out of it, I just got to say. When we, interviewed him a while back and he, we asked him about it. He said some pretty interesting stuff about how POV is really good for character work. And it's... instead of like having multiple POVs, it can offer, here's his quote, it can offer a very separate story while illuminating your characters. So in that sense, the time jumps do that perfectly. It's like you get those interludes, like he steals too much, and then you're in the future. And then you have that flashback where it's like, oh, you have to, I forget what it was, when he first meets Kappa Barsavi and has to like swallow, like put the shark's tooth in his mouth and all of that. And he pledges his allegiance to the daughter, right? So like they said, and then cut to the next scene of like him meeting her, and then she dies moments later. So it's like all this great character work is happening, and it pays off in ways that we don't expect. And I don't know, I mean, to me, it was a really fascinating read, and it breaks it up. It makes it very readable and digestible, and you know things when you need to know them. I was all on board.
I'm glad you enjoyed that. I think when I recommended it way back to you, that was one of the things that gave me a little bit of, made me want to give a little bit of caution about it. But you've really come around on your take on, ever since Mark Lawrence told you this whole, it's kind of like multiple POVs thing, you've really changed your tune. So yeah, I think it's cool because you do get these moments that you are foreshadowed well and are played with, like like I don't have to be able to beat you, I just have to be able to hold you until Jean comes. That's exactly. A great one. And
he does that. I mean, he managed to learn some lessons, I suppose.
Yeah. And there's a great quote about that too that I don't have in front of me, but when he's killing the guy who had the crossbow, who was like waiting after Bug and the Sansa twins get killed, there's like a guy with a crossbow and just does one thing because he's like one arrow because he's just waiting for Jean because they thought they drowned Locke in a barrel of horse piss. And then they both come back. They end up killing the guy, and he's like, when you meet your maker, like, and he's like, he says something along the lines of like, and you see your like friends there. It's like, let them know that Locke learns slowly, but he learns.
Oh, yeah,
And
right.
so
I remember that.
he does eventually. Yeah, there's some core characteristics he'll never unlearn, but
And he did.
picks up on a few
He
things.
learned that lesson at a pretty hard cost, I'll say, too.
True.
Losing
And
everyone.
while we're on it, Charles, can we talk about that moment? Because that moment where they come back and the Sansa twins are dead, and then Bug not
dying.
far behind. Yeah, like, someone's going to die because the guy's still got a crossbow bolt, and ends up being poor Bug, who I love Bug.
Bug is
But
great.
he wasn't long for this world. Yeah, there's another fantastic quote, I don't have it from me, but is along the lines of where like Bug jumps off the tower, and he's like, it's like, with all the like knowledge from his 12 years of life, that he like that injury and death were things that happened to other people, not Bug.
Yes.
Yes.
I remember that.
Dude, Scott Lynch. So good. So, anyway, yeah. So, when everyone dies in that scene, for me, that is like the pivotal moment that defined my first read of The Lies of Locke Lamora, where I was like, oh, this is what we're dealing with here. Like, this author is not afraid to kill his characters, and he's willing to really go there. And
Right.
I never thought that most of the thieving crew would be dead by the end of the book, especially because I knew there were sequels.
Right.
And you just think, oh, the whole crew's going to be there. Maybe they'll lose one or something. Maybe Bug dies, but not the
And it's
Sansa
not
twins
even
and
just the
Bug.
loss of all those characters, it's the loss of their temple, too. It's like all the money's gone.
Yeah.
The temple's broken, shattered, like literally lost everything. It's such a huge loss, and it works so well because it comes off a moment of Locke like seemingly getting away with it. And we've been told this whole time, Locke, you're playing with fire, you're like, you're risking too much, this, that, and the other. And multiple times this has happened to him. And it's like, this is something Scott Lynch was telling us over and over and over again. And I even remember talking to him, I have a feeling that this heist is not going to go over well after
Well, you said it was like a brilliant text you sent to me. I had to play it cool, but you were like, you were picking up on this pattern where you're like, I'm feeling this heist isn't going to go so well. And you're like, every time that Locke tries to pull some giant maneuver, like, people end up dead. You said something like that. And
everyone gets
I was
killed.
like, wow, that is, you're like, I was like, you weren't just like, it goes awry. You're like, people end up dead.
Yeah.
So I was like, that's a good call, Charles. But were you expecting that
And
level
even still, like the violation of it, I think it is what's so impactful. One, I was not expecting them all to die. I mean, certainly, it's people die, but I could have never predicted that. But I knew that he was like, this heist was going to end poorly because it's called The Lies of Locke Lamora, and we've spent so much time talking about how he keeps messing up over and over and over. But I was not ready for that, and I wasn't ready for just the pure, like, it. Even though he is a thief, there's the injustice of it, and there's the violation of it, and the bonds mage who, not even through any cunning or skill, he can just like manipulate people through magic. I think that's another part that eats away at Locke too. It's not like he was outwitted. It's just this guy can, with your name, stop you in your tracks and cut you to pieces while you're standing there, and he can find you, and he only needs one person. So I think all that stuff stacks and stacks and stacks, and that moment, just the impact of that is so strong.
It really is. And you said the word violation, and it made me think part of why this hits so hard is Scott Lynch's choice to make the Sansa twins' deaths off screen. Or off page, if you will, where that's very unusual to kill that I don't know if main a character is the right word, but that important of a character.
Oh, sure.
To kill two characters at that level off the page and just have our characters come back and see both of their throats are slit.
Mm-hmm.
It's like you're used to, if you get a main character death, you're used to the build up to it, right? Like, oh, and then they were fighting and you're like, uh-oh, they might actually lose this fight. And then maybe they do and they die. But the violation of coming back to two Sansa twins with both of their throats slit
so brutal.
Is just brutal. Yeah.
It's a great scene, and it's one of those things where it's like somehow Locke always manages to survive, but it's the people around him that kind of not necessarily pay the price because they're all complicit in it, but it's still like he was in charge of them. It was his idea. It's his plan. And just he survives for whatever reason. And it reminds me of a quote where, Bug did something stupid and he's like, oh, I pulled a lock, and it's like only Locke can pull a lock. Like where other people would die, he stays alive. And then the Sansa twins are speculating. It's like because we think the gods are saving him up for a really big death, something with knives and hot irons. And the other twin comes in and is like, and 50,000 cheering spectators. Where it's like this is a guy who's just stacking up grievance after grievance after grudge, and he just keeps hustling at the cost of stacking that tower ever higher. And it's like, how messed up can his situation get before he loses it all? And he'll just keep stacking those cards. Doesn't know any other way.
Yeah, this book is so quotable.
I mean, we should just do an explicit, just quote sharing episode.
Oh, that would be good. I'd actually really like to do that. And and that's one of the first. That's one of the earlier quotes with this theme of Locke. He's getting away with things, but eventually this is all going to add up. And he didn't quite get his in the way of he didn't get killed, but he got his in the way that Locke cares so much about his crew that, I mean, he probably would have rather died himself than
for sure
happened. Yeah.
For sure. Like, and that's the compassionate thing about him. Even when it was a bunch of nobles or a bunch of his random classmates, I'm calling them classmates, but I mean they were just a bunch of orphans in a graveyard. He didn't want any of them to get killed, even the worst among them, the bullies. He's just like, no, they're like, I'm not here to kill people. I love the game, and I just want to keep playing at higher and higher levels, and he just hasn't recognized the cost of that. And this kind of homages to that. It's like he keeps stacking up. They're saving him up for something really big, the gods. He's going to get killed in a spectacular way with thousands of people cheering. He hasn't quite gotten there yet. And I think the end of this book is just another couple thousand people that are going to cheer his death at some point when he gets there. It's just a incredible quote, and just another kind of ominous thing about the tragedy of Locke's character, I suppose, and that he lost everything in that moment at the temple. And with the temple shattered after Scott Lynch wrote all these beautiful dinner scenes and described all this stuff, and how painstaking Father Chains went to build this secret place that no one knows about. And the bond mage just comes in and corrupts all of it. It's a tough loss. I missed that. I missed that place, the temple. It seemed like a really nice, homey place. And now that Locke has nothing to lose, now it's like, what is he? How much further is he gonna go? So,
yeah, it's a good question. I mean, I know I don't know past the third book. Obviously, the fourth is in a situation where we don't know when it's coming. Although Scott Lynch did relatively recently say he's finally been able to get back to writing.
Right, in the past month or so, he says he's been flirting with getting back in and everything, and that was very exciting to see. I got a lot of messages after that happened. And
Well,
we
you were already planning on reading it
Yeah,
about that. It was like
yeah.
right when you were about to start reading it, I think. So I don't know, Charles. Maybe there's just some good
This,
juju around you
I
when it comes to
think
you
there
and
is,
reading.
Dylan. I like that theory. I'll take some credit for that. Sure, why
Yeah,
not?
so if you're happy that Scott Lynch is getting back into writing Gentleman Bastard stuff, you have Charles to thank.
Well, he picked a great time because I only just have started getting into it. I've got 2 more books to go, and there's so many more after that, and I'm ready for it. So hopefully he's feeling up to cranking that book out. But in your own time, when they're ready.
Right. And while we're on the topic of future books, Charles, let me bring up a character that did not make an appearance in this book actually on the page.
Yeah.
And that character is Sabitha, who's mentioned over and over again. What we do know at this point is that she's some almost long lost love now of Locke's, where they keep saying like thousands of miles away. We know she was part of the thieving crew at one point, and that's and we know that she has red hair. That's pretty much what we know about her. But she's mentioned a lot. There's something I found very, I guess, odd about the book when I first read it. Like, he's very restrained with the Sabitha character, and you can tell he's really building her up. But,
Right.
Yeah, what'd you think reading it for the first time?
I thought it was interesting. I kept wondering how Sabitha was going to play into this, because Father Trains originally was like, and then there's Sabitha, who's off learning her own trades right now. And they all go off and learn stuff. So you're like, okay, but she's been gone this whole time. And then later in the book, between Locke and Jean, they talk about, like, they allude to like a romance that potentially may or may not have happened with Locke and Sabitha. So to me, it made it feel like that there's more story than this one book. It's kind of an interesting way to kind of build this world and his overarching plan for these characters. So it's like, oh, well, she's not someone you want to forget about. There's a larger story that's coming. And it's interesting. It's unusual, but I'm for it.
Yeah. So Sabitha is one of those characters that's very controversial in the.
She didn't even do anything.
The Lies of Locke Lamora space. Well, the Gentleman Bastard space. I mean, I don't want to.
She becomes more controversial.
In terms of the fan base, it's like I would say the only thing I could compare it to, although it's on a lower level in terms of how much people talk about it, is actually Denna from the Kingkiller Chronicles. It's like, and that's, Charles talked about how his online identity has been like interwoven with not having read Lies of Locke Lamora. Mine, for a long time, a little less so lately, just because we haven't been doing a lot of Kingkiller content, I think. But for a long time, I was like the guy who defends Denna from Patrick Rothfuss's Kingkiller Chronicle. So I can't get too much into Denna or Sabitha right now, just from a spoiler territory. But I'll say that the fan base is very split on Sabitha, and as the reception of it and some of my thoughts on it reminds me of the controversy around Denna from the Kingkiller Chronicles. So I'll say no more. But,
interesting. Well, I'm looking forward to the greater world of the Gentleman Bastards, and that just seems like another character, like another piece on the board for future stories. So I love me a good controversy, especially when it comes to characters. So I'm all for that. Before we wrap up here, do we want to talk about like the ending a little bit more? I feel like there's a whole, like, we talked about that pivotal scene where Locke loses everything, but then there's the whole part at the end with Caparezza, and you have the Duke of Camor, you have the Spider, like you have all of these things going on at the end, which we alluded to a little bit, but I wanted to get your sense on like how the ending of this book felt to you and your thoughts on it.
Yeah, I really like the ending. I really like the way that all of it ties together, because there's times where you've got like the Don Salvara stuff where I'm like, okay, is this even relevant anymore?
Right.
Like, why is this still here? But it actually, there's a good job where everyone's actually at the party and all of these plot lines start weaving together, where actually you had the Grey King trying to take revenge on the nobles, and you get this sort of dream team up between the Spider of Camor, that's Danya, I might butcher this, Angevesta Vorcenza, and then also the Don and Danya Salvara, and they're all working together. So it's kind of fun to see where Locke goes back in, he's all tied up, and you've got them like, I don't believe a word you say. Like, Conte says to him something along the lines of, he's like, I wouldn't believe you if you told me my name was Conte. It's like, but Locke is trying to convince
also remember,
them. Yeah,
I gotta just shout out one of my favorite moments
Yeah.
where the spider, like before all this, the spider's got Locke captured. It's like, you're not going anywhere. I have the antidote, and you're gonna give me the answers.
Oh,
Then he just punches her in the face. She's this old lady,
He's like-
right?
Yeah. Yeah, that's a great moment. It's like,
I love that.
Yeah, go on.
I'm like, how many times have I rooted for this to happen in other books and it never happens? Like when the villain is just explaining his plans the whole time and you're like, do something. Like this was one of those great moments where it was like, kind of reminded me of Heroes Die, where it's like the best time to attack someone is right in the middle of them talking, and that's what Locke does. He just like socks her right in the face, takes the antidote, and then jumps out the window onto the elevator. It's insane. And then then he comes back into the scene you're talking about. And then so not only did he like lose all good faith with everyone, he's has to now negotiate with the spider who just got punched in the face.
Yes, and she's under a spell. But just want to say too, that moment is so amazing because it's just like she's, and there's like speculation kind of in Locke's head about like, well, maybe she's just not used to dealing with the kind of people who would punch an old lady in the face, but like she did not really think that part through as an option. So yeah, awesome moment. And then to see him having to try to negotiate with these people now, and then they're trying to basically work together to stop the Grey King's plan and then kill the Grey King is just really fun. And I feel like the fight scenes toward the end, like you get Jean against the twins, and it's actually extremely well written. Like that's something I kind of really appreciate on this reread that I might not have before, which is Scott Lynch writes action really well, even though there's not a ton in here. So I love the scenes where Jean kills the twins, and then
the sisters.
Yeah, the Brangia sisters, and then also we get the fight scene between Locke and the Grey King, which is a fantastic scene. And we know one of the things I love about Locke is he's a flawed character and he's not a great fighter, and he would lose in a fair fight to the Grey King. But he uses his wit to actually trick the Grey King by being like, I just have to hold you until Jean gets here. And then he like flicks a coin, I think it is, just to make a sound over the other way. And it just gets that moment where the Grey King turns and then Locke stabs him.
Right.
And it's just I love the fight scene, and it's so true to the character. It's like he doesn't win because he's a good fighter. He wins because he doesn't fight fair. So I love the end.
Right,
Yeah.
and then he does like in both of those fight scenes, I think another layer to what made the fight scene, both of them, so good was that he's been setting them up like from the beginning of the book. It's like we've seen Jean get the best training a fighter can get, and not just like fencing training. The guy's like, I'm going to teach you how to kill a guy with a sword. Like that's the that distinction there.
Well, with hatchets.
Right. I just remember that line. I thought was great from the Rose there. I forget his name. And and then you have the sisters who are like the gladiator champions and are doing all these like incredible things, and then the reveal that they're actually sisters to the Grey King was a fun little twist also. But so that they're set up and they're like kind of almost evenly matched in some ways, and like the fight got messy, and it was just good. And then we obviously got that whole scene where Jean like defeated an old gang by just holding out for Locke was holding out for Jean to appear and beat up the other gang member, and he's doing the same thing. And even you as the reader is like, is Jean really gonna pop in here right now? Like even in that moment, you're not quite sure what's going on. And that's when Locke gives that finishing blow, which, very well done. I feel like it's hard when you're at the end of a book and you're at that culminating scene to surprise readers. It's like you genuinely don't know which way the outcome is going to go and how it's going to go down. But it was all set up and paid off really well. He managed to know what cards he was working with and was able to surprise us still at the end. So that's something that I greatly appreciated from Scott Lynch in those final moments.
Well said, Charles. Yeah. And I'll say I also like the Grey King as a villain. Not just that they do that good job of building him up almost through building up Capo Barsavi.
Right.
But that he's one of those villains. I think the best villains are the ones where you understand that their motive, like their motivation and all this stuff. His parents and siblings were brutally murdered by Capo Barsavi, and we get that reminder that it's like Capo Barsavi's a terrible person.
Yes.
Like
yes.
like
that's a piece of it.
What the Grey King did to Barsavi is no worse than what Barsavi would do to anyone that got in his way. So we don't have to necessarily feel that bad for Barsavi and all of this.
No.
It's just that our wonderful gentleman bastards got caught up in this feud in a way that we do feel bad for, like Nicolo and Galdo.
Right, and that's almost another piece of it where it's like, man, these people you're all wrapped up in, they don't even like matter all that much. They're horrible people. And you still got thrown into the middle of it, so.
Right. Yeah, and I'll say, anyway, about the Grey King as a villain, I think the best villains, their motivation, but they are going too far with it. Like, they're not just evil for the sake of being evil. They become the villain because something just pushed them over the edge. And you're like, I don't know, maybe if that happened to me, I would, want similar things. I mean, I'd like to think I'd never want to, murder all of those people, but you get the point. If someone
bombs that kill every noble person in the city,
gentles them, which is almost
fate
like
worse
it turns
than
them
death.
into walking zombies almost. But it's like, I see where you're coming from. This is just not the way to go about this. Is a good villain, I feel like. So love the Grey King as a villain, and also I just find it really interesting from the perspective of this constantly underestimated bit, that it's like the people who end up taking down the Grey King are the gentleman bastards, are like Locke Lamora, and they're almost, if you think from the Grey King's perspective, they're like an afterthought in his original plan.
Right.
He was like, oh, I'll just get the guy who's like really good at acting and has a lot of money. Like, I'll get him to play me in this ruse. I'll kill him off and then kind of like kill off his crew, whatever. And I'll take their money because, I need to pay for this bonds mage. But the main part of his plan had nothing to do with the gentleman bastards. They were just kind of pawns in this whole thing. And then it's interesting from that underestimated place that it's like, it's Locke Lamora and the gentleman bastards who end up taking this guy down when what he probably thought was the hardest part of his plan, taking down Barsavi, was completely accomplished. And he also would have accomplished the gentling the nobles thing if it weren't for Locke. So
absolutely.
It's just interesting to think that our villain's the main antagonist to the villain, if that makes sense, if we're in the Grey King's head, is like Capo Barsavi, and then he's taken down by someone he wasn't even really thinking
And it was
about.
Locke willing to risk his own life and his own heist to get to him also. Like, that conscious choice through compassion, he was able to pull it off too, which I thought was a nice touch. And then, of course...
And vengeance.
Mostly
Compassion
vengeance.
and vengeance.
Mostly
the big
vengeance, yeah. And then we get that lovely scene at the end where the spider realizes that the treasure was in the ship the whole time.
Yeah.
Which
I love that.
I was always on the fence about that. I was like, he kind of was like, oh, and also you want to sink that ship. And then the ship goes down, and the fact that it was a death offering I thought was really great, because it's like, yeah, it was 4 or 5 people, but it was the people that you really, your family that you're paying for, and you essentially got them killed. So, like, I don't even know if all that money is enough, but it was just, part of Locke's can't help himself, gotta pull off a con, even when he is like so lucky to even be let go by the spider in that original moment where he's like, oh, you also have to promise me you'll sink the ships, where it's like you're still trying to pull a heist in those final moments.
In Locke's defense, he's a priest, and he takes this very seriously, like the death offering aspect of it. So that was... I don't think that was just pure Locke not being able to help himself.
He
I
could
think that was
still,
something that was
the
ridiculously
money as a
important
death
to him.
offering. He risked a lot to sink that ship, as he always does.
Yes and no. I mean, it doesn't seem as much just Locke being brazen for the sake of it as some other things. Like, it has more...
I mean, you have to admit, though, it's
to it,
flashy and has some style.
Oh, yeah.
Like,
yeah, that's Locke. You're right.
That's all. It's like he had to go for the style points on top of...
He did.
On top of, winning wasn't enough, so...
Locke does love style points. That's very true. And that's another moment of it. And part of the style points of it, too, is that he tells them that the money is actually buried under, tons of crap. So then they're just digging through crap to try to get their money. So it's like... And so those are style points as well. And perhaps that was even more just style points for the sake of it, because he could have said the money was anywhere. But he says under a bunch of crap. So that's Locke for you.
Yep. Pete, the
and he does. He does tell Jean, I believe, that he's like, oh, I realize before all this, he's like, oh, I realize they've been taking all of our money out to that ship. Mm-hmm. So, if you're reading it, it's kind of confusing, because he tells Jean that thing, and then he acts like he just had an epiphany when he's talking to the spider and all them. Mm-hmm. So it's like, wait, is it on the ship? Is it not on the ship? And then it's on the ship. So love that. And also I wanted to mention, is moving a little bit away from the ending, but I'll say, not a little bit, a lot away from the ending. But I'll say that something I noticed in this read of the book is Lynch does a little bit further away from the character's point of view, and even does some head hopping. He doesn't do the George R.R. Martin, Joe Abercrombie style of point of view writing, the third person limited. He doesn't do it to the same extent. He's almost halfway between third person limited and third person omniscient, it feels like. Do you notice that head hopping and stuff at all?
I did notice he was not afraid to change POVs, because coming from something like Game of Thrones or First Law, the POV is a sacred thing. I mean, Abercrombie does play around with that quite a bit, but he always keeps the POV kind of sacred. And then you have this, and it's we're going with it. We're flowing. We're free flowing. And I was totally okay with it. It's one of those, he's got a lot of great characters, and I don't think he ever sacrificed the characterization for things like, I have to tell the plot in sequential order, and I have to like stop the chapter and start a new one to get the new POV. It's like, no, whatever I'm in the mood to tell right now, I'm just going to tell. I'm going to tell it as it serves the character and what's happening in this scene I'm trying to build. And I appreciated that. As a reader, you're like, I know what I need to know, and I can keep going, and I can just enjoy the moment that I'm in. And that's, in fantasy, that's kind of a rare thing. Yeah, it's not something you can always afford to do with these big fantasy series. So I was okay with it.
Right. That's good to hear. I was okay with it too. It just was interesting as someone who's read a lot more fantasy now than when I first read the Gentleman Bastard sequence, where I was like, oh wow, this is an unusual way to use the third person point of view compared to most fantasy these days.
And I will say, I'll give a little FTF sneak peek here at the very end of the episode. Here, I did crack the cover on the first couple pages of the 5th season. And that
of the 5th season.
And that just takes narration and throws it out the window.
Well, second person.
Yes, and then sometimes it goes, "You are this person. You're doing this."
Well, that's the second. That's a second.
Here's this person. He does that to him, and it's like verb tenses I have never considered before. It's like so I'm down for all of it. It's like whatever you need to do to tell the story. Let's get weird with it. I'm cool. I'm not.
Yeah. Well. It's good to be flexible like that. Charles, you told me before we record this episode that you had some hot takes about the Jean and Locke relationship.
Oh, yeah.
And I want to make sure we get into that before we close the episode out, because you didn't even really explain them to me because you wanted to save it for the episode.
Right. So okay. One of the things that I was told over and over again about The Lies of Locke Lamora, and this was even, I would joke and I would recommend this book to people having never read it and said, oh, Locke and Jean, best duo in fantasy. And like, I got told that a lot. I told that to other people. I've recommended this book countless times and I've never read it. So based off of that and reading this book, it's like, I get that have this history and that they're like brothers and they do have a great relationship, but I would even argue that they're not even a duo in this book, and they're certainly not better than like Royce and Adrian of
from Raya
Revelations
by Michael Sullivan.
By Michael J. Sullivan, correct. So, which to me still stands atop the duo list with your classics, your Merry and Pippins and all that stuff, Sam and Frodo's, and all those other classic duos. But to me, Locke and John, I even think to call them a duo until the very end is a bit generous. Hot take. Oh,
no, I understand. Yeah, well, I understand that. I would say that they are a duo even in this book, but part of it is the Gentleman Bastards. There's 5 of them at the start of the book. And if you don't count Sabbatha,
you gotta count Sabbatha.
But there's a bunch of them, and Locke and Jean, you can tell, are two. Well, I probably wouldn't even say they are the 2 closest, actually, because Kahlo and so the Sansa twins are probably closer, just because they're basically the same person. But yeah, anyway, you can tell that Locke and Jean have a special relationship, and you do get the backstory of when Locke didn't like Jean at first, and then Jean hit Locke, and they kind of came to understand each other. So you get moments like that, and then of course at the end you really get now it's just Locke and Jean. So you get more of these duo moments, and you get the flashback with the I just have to hold you until Jean comes. Yep. That kind of stuff. So I think I'd be definitely willing to call them a duo in this, but I see where you're coming from, and it was actually illuminating for me on the reread, where I was like, oh, wow, really maybe not all, but the majority of the best moments of Locke and Jean as a duo come after this book, because this book sets us up where all the other gentlemen bastards are dead, and we're just taking off in a ship with just Locke and Jean. So from here on out, there's going to be a lot of time just spent between those two.
Right.
And yeah, it's interesting. It's really way more of a like an ensemble cast,
Right,
rather than a like main two in this one. So I see where you're coming from, Charles, and I think you'll get a lot more pushback from people who've read all three of the books than you will from people who've only read the Lies of Locke Lamora.
I see that the stage is set for them to be an iconic duo, and they certainly have a great chemistry. I think their scenes together are great. I see that they have a strong connection. But I also see, okay, now it's just the two of them. Now they're together. Now they're off on an adventure. Like, that's kind of how this book ends. So I can see how that would pick up in future books. It's just one of those things that I was looking for. And I'm like, I don't know, guys. I'm like 3/4 of the way into this book. And yeah, Jean stands out. But they're all still rolling. They're all still in the mix. And then they weren't in the mix shortly afterwards. So it's like, I get it now. I get it. And of course, it was the fact that it was interesting how Locke uses like his trust in Jean to kind of trick the Grey King at the end, you know. But it was still because of that it was able to work. Because of their connection that it was able to work. So all in all, great duo. But I can see where the best is yet to come in terms of their relationship and to cement them in that best duo of all time category. Certainly not there at the end of this book for me, but still great characters.
I hear you, Charles.
Appreciate that.
I hear you. And I do think most folks who have reread The Lies of Locke Lamora relatively recently, even if they've read the whole thing, like meaning the whole series, or folks who've only read The Lies of Locke Lamora, I think they'll be cool with what you just said. You might get some folks who've just read the whole series. Yeah.
But I'm going to take the best duo of all time.
Questioning the sanctity.
That's true.
Yeah. Questioning the sanctity of the Locke and Jean relationship is just treacherous ground to be walking. I'm cool with it. And I do think I assume it's going to be another decade or so before I can convince you to read Red Seas Under Red Skies, Book 2 of the Gentleman Bastard sequence.
That doesn't have the same ring to it as make him read Lies of Locke Lamora, but we'll see.
Okay, so you're not even going to be like, oh no, Dylan, it's not going to be another decade. I will read that soon. You're gonna just sit there like this right now.
Well, I will say it's not on my radar right now, but I would like to read it. I would like to read it.
It's not on your radar? How's it on your radar?
We're trying to relaunch. You know it's not on my radar. We decided on a reading schedule for the next 2 months. It's set in stone.
Yeah, okay, but radar, I feel like, if you go on people's Goodreads in this community, everyone's got 300 books on their want to read list.
Oh, yeah, it's on the want to read list.
It's got to be on the radar,
It's on the want to read
radar makes it sound like
list.
It's not on your immediate TBR, is what you're saying.
I'm definitely saying that, yes. I don't have an actual time planned in which I will sit down and read it. There's so many books we want to read, but I do want to read it. I'm not feeling rushed to read it because this series has a long ways to go, so I'll get around to it. There's so many other fantastic series and authors out there that we have not experienced and discussed, but man, I'm looking forward to the day where I do read the next book, because I was highly entertained by The Lies of Locke Lamora, and I love the character work that was done in this book, and I'm ready for more of these characters. They're kind of unbridled by all the backstory and stuff now. They're free to go on an adventure, and I'm sure there's more.
You might think so. But there might be a lot more interludes in your future, Charles, when you do get around to it.
Well, maybe I should just check it out then. But
I will say that I do think The Lies of Locke Lamora is the best of
That's what I've
the
heard.
trilogy.
It's
I
pretty
think
much a
I'm
unanimous.
Far from the only one.
Yeah.
Yeah. I do think, I would say so far, each book has been a bit of a step down from the previous one, but when you're starting as high up as we're starting with
Right.
The Lies of Locke Lamora, even taking a step down from there, they're all great books.
Right.
So
Right.
I
And
highly
that's kind of
recommend
the
all of them.
unanimous thing that I've heard. And even if the book, like going into it knowing it's not living up to the reputation of the first one, I'm still okay with that. I mean, it's like the guy has a voice like no one else I've read, and he's got a sense of humor so in line with my own that I'm going to read whatever he writes. So definitely going to read it. And even though I don't have any immediate plans to pick it up, it will be read at some point. It's on the list.
Fantastic.
But like before we wrap it all up, I just got to say, like, Comeback Week has come to a close. It's like we're in the middle of it right now, and we're just enjoying the idea of being back, and we're looking at regularly releasing episodes again, and it won't be 5 a week, that is for sure. Dylan, I'm not sure how much we want to get into right now, but all I can say is, like, look out for weekly content, right? Like an episode a week is the goal.
Yeah, should be an episode a week, and we're excited to be back. It's been so cool how the community has welcomed us back. I'm going to be honest, when we went on hiatus, and it'd been months and months, I mean, we were on hiatus for 8 months or something like that, Charles?
Maybe longer, yeah. It's been a while. We were
It's been a
releasing
while.
monthly episodes for the Catherine Voyage, but outside of that, we weren't releasing episodes, and we went on hiatus.
We
in, like,
interviewed Sarah during it too.
Right.
But that was probably just
So, like,
those...
late summer
Anyway.
last year, we went on hiatus, and then like all winter, and then like everything, we were gone.
I think it was September.
Okay.
September, that because I think we did the Abercrombie interview in September, if I'm remembering correctly. So
It's like, almost 10 months.
maybe really late August. Anyway, yeah. So it's been a long time, and my point is, I was convinced everyone was going to forget about us. But we've been so lucky that everyone's welcomed us back and been so kind. So if you're one of the folks who's been interacting with us on social media, or just anyone who's listening to these episodes and like cares enough to,
Incredible.
like, we're over an hour and a half into this, to still be listening, I mean, thank you so much. We're so excited to be back, and we've got a lot more that we're super pumped in store for you soon. So
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. We're
We're
going to be
back.
bouncing around series, guys. We're not going to be like
Yeah.
reading through a whole body of work like we used to set out to do. We're going to hop around a little bit, but this just means more books and more authors in a faster amount of time. So we're pretty excited about that. I'm feeling a lot of good energy. You know, we went on hiatus to kind of recalibrate and get the inspiration back, and I think the hunger's back, the excitement's back. It's
Right.
been a while since the two of us sat down together for an episode. We've always had the guests with us, and it just feels good, man. I'm feeling good. I feel like I'm still getting into the motions of it just being the two of us, but you know, I had a lot of fun. This was a great book to come back to. Such a easy book to talk about for an hour and a half, because it's just so many moments to celebrate and to talk about that. You know, this has been a lot of fun.
For sure. I've had a blast chatting with my friend Charles.
Mm-hmm.
I'm so happy that Charles has finally read this book I've been recommending to him for a
can't
decade.
even
I had to
believe
enlist.
It's
I
still
know.
2 or 3 more days before we announce this to the public, and I don't know what will become of me after that. You know, so much of my online persona is tied into this book that I feel like we're not only closing a chapter like in Friends Talking fantasy history, because I feel like Comeback Week is ending. We've read Lies of Locke Lamora. Like, what's next? You know, the great beyond for FTF. It's the same thing for like us personally now on and the way we communicate over in the Twitter sphere. It's like, what's the next thing that's going to catch on? We'll have to wait and see. But I'm excited to share this with the community, with the world, and I'm looking forward to the future of this show. It's looking very bright.
I think the next thing to catch on will be the food pictures that I post on my personal account at Dylan R. Marsh. That's
enough of that.
Find me over there.
I think we've kind of
I post some great food pictures.
All of our conversation around Lies of Locke Lamora for now. Rest assured, more conversation around Scott Lynch's work will be forthcoming. But for now, I think there's nothing left to do but to play that sweet, sweet outro music. What do you think?
Get that sweet, sweet outro music pumping, Charles.
All right. You know, it's been a while since I've heard the outro music while live recording. You know, I always put it in afterwards when we have the guests. But here we are, guys. Thank you all so much for listening to yet another very exciting episode of the Friends Talking Fantasy Podcast. If you like what you heard today, do us a favor and let us know over on the FTF Podcast with the number 1 at the end on Twitter. Couldn't get that without the 1. But we've got the FTF Podcast on our other Instagram as the other big one.
And Instagram is just at the FTF Podcast.
Yeah. And Dylan, if they like what they heard today and they followed us on the socials, they listened to the episodes, and they want to support us even more, what can they do?
Toss 5 stars to our podcast, which you can now do on Spotify. And apparently like 60%. Yeah, I know. Like 60% of you are listening on Spotify. So if just a fraction of you wonderful folks were to throw us 5 stars, it's right on the top of the little podcast feed there. That would be so fantastic. It helps us out so much. You can also give us a rating on Apple Podcasts. And yeah, but just listening. That's what I used to say. Just listening is more than enough.
Man, you're natural.
That's
it's like
line.
You never left. You just went right into it on instinct. Just listening, guys. This is more than enough. Thank you for making it to the end of this episode, the end of comeback week, the end of an era for the FTF podcast. And we are going to come back next week with weekly content. Who knows what the next episode will bring? You're not going to want to miss it. Thank you all so much for returning. And as always, go forth and conquer, friends.